Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving deep into a philosophical heavyweight, all 3 volumes of Arthur Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Idea.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one.
Now I know. That might sound daunting, but trust me, it's worth the effort. This book grapples with some seriously big questions about the nature of reality, the meaning of life, and even the possibility of happiness.
Absolutely. And you know what? The journey is just as fascinating as the destination. Schopenhauer's writing is dense, but also surprisingly engaging, full of vivid imagery and sharp wit.
I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So, to help us navigate this philosophical labyrinth, maybe we should start with a roadmap. What are some of the key takeaways we're hoping to uncover in this deep dive?
Sure. Essentially, Schopenhauer argues that the world we experience is driven by a blind, striving force. He calls it will. Think of it like a fundamental energy that permeates everything, from the simplest organism to the most complex human desire.
Okay, so far so good. But where does the idea part come in?
Right. Well, Schopenhauer was heavily influenced by Kant, who argued that we can only ever know the world as it appears to us, not as it is in itself. Schopenhauer takes this further, saying that what we perceive as reality is actually a representation of this underlying will, a kind of mental projection he calls the idea.
So, it's like we're watching a movie, but the projector is this mysterious will that we can never fully grasp.
That's a great analogy. And just like a movie, the world we experience is full of fleeting images, constantly changing, and ultimately illusory.
Wow, that's pretty mind-bending stuff. So, if the world is essentially an illusion, and this will is driving us towards who knows what, does that mean we're all doomed to a life of misery?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Schopenhauer doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of existence, but he does offer a glimmer of hope. He suggests that by understanding the nature of will, we can actually find a way to transcend it, to achieve a state of peace and even happiness.
That sounds promising, but also a bit paradoxical. How can we escape something that's the very foundation of reality?
Well, that's a question we'll explore in depth throughout this deep dive. But for now, let's start at the beginning, with Schopenhauer's critique of Kant, and his assertion that understanding Kant is crucial before tackling his own work.
Yeah, he even compares it to reaching adulthood
Yeah.
before tackling advanced concepts.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you wouldn't hand a toddler a calculus textbook.
Exactly. He believed that engaging with Kant's philosophy directly was essential for grasping his own ideas, and, he was quite critical of those who relied on superficial interpretations of Kant.
So, he wasn't a fan of SparkNotes then?
Not exactly. He believed that those second-hand interpretations could distort the original meaning, and he urged readers to go straight to the source.
Wow. In the spirit of following Schopenhauer's advice, let's do a quick recap of some core Kantian ideas, just to kind of set the stage.
Excellent idea. So, Kant's philosophy revolves around the distinction between the phenomenal world, which is the world as we experience it through our senses, and the noumenal world, which is the world as it truly is, independent of our perception.
So, it's like the difference between looking at a tree and understanding all those complex biological processes happening within it that we can't see with the naked eye.
Precisely. Kant argued that we can only ever access the phenomenal world, the world filtered through our senses and shaped by our minds. The noumenal world, the thing in itself, remains forever beyond our grasp.
Okay, so we're trapped in a kind of sensory bubble, only able to perceive the shadows on the cave wall, so to speak. Where does Schopenhauer take this idea?
He takes it a step further. Schopenhauer agrees with Kant that the world we experience is a representation. But he argues that this representation is not just a passive reflection of the noumenal world. It's an active creation of our own minds, driven by this underlying force he calls will.
So that's where the will comes in. It's not just some abstract force out there. It's the very thing shaping our perception of reality.
Exactly. And Schopenhauer goes on to explore this relationship between will and idea in great detail. He even tackles that age-old philosophical question. Is the external world real or just a dream?
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more.
So, Schopenhauer argues that our experience of reality, whether in waking life or in dreams, is structured according to the principle of sufficient reason. Everything we perceive has a cause, a reason for its existence. It's this principle that allows us to distinguish between a dream and reality, even though both might feel equally real in the moment.
So even though the content of our dreams might be nonsensical, there's still kind of logic, a chain of cause and effect within the dream itself.
Exactly. It's like 2 separate chains, each link connected within its own chain. but not to the links in the other chain.
Okay, I think I'm following you. Schopenhauer uses some really striking examples to illustrate this point, right? Like
Yeah.
the classic example of a stick appearing broken in water.
Yes, that's a perfect example. We know the stick isn't actually broken, but because of the way light refracts in water, our senses perceive it that way.
Right, and that's not just a quirk of human perception, right?
Right.
He uses the example of an elephant refusing to cross a bridge it deems unsafe, to argue that even animals perceive cause and effect a priori, meaning it's built into their very understanding of the world.
Absolutely. And this was actually a departure from Kant, who believed that only humans possessed a priori knowledge. Schopenhauer argued that even animals, without the capacity for reason, still exhibit this intuitive understanding of cause and effect.
That's fascinating. So
Yeah.
we've established that the world we experience is a representation, an idea, shaped by this underlying force of will. But what exactly is this will? Where does it come from? What does it want?
Those are the questions that Schopenhauer spends a considerable amount of time grappling with. And his answers, as you might expect, are not simple or straightforward.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Idea. We left off with that question of what this mysterious will actually is. Yeah, it's definitely a question that's been swirling around in my mind. So far, we've established that it's this blind, striving force that shapes our perception of reality. But what's driving it? Does it have a purpose? Or is it just this kind of chaotic energy that's pulling us in all directions?
Well, Schopenhauer argues that the will, by its very nature, is aimless and insatiable. It's not striving towards anything specific. It's simply a constant, relentless urge
To be.
to express itself, to expand.
It's like an engine that's always running,
Yeah,
but it doesn't actually have a destination.
exactly. And this constant striving without a clear goal or endpoint is what Schopenhauer sees as the source of suffering. We're constantly chasing after something that we can never fully grasp, always yearning for something more.
You know, that actually resonates with me. There's that famous quote from Schopenhauer: life swings like a pendulum, backward and forward between pain and boredom.
Yes. That quote perfectly encapsulates Schopenhauer's view of the human condition. We're caught in this endless cycle of desire and disappointment. We experience pain when our desires are frustrated, and boredom when they're fulfilled, leaving us craving something new to strive for.
It's almost like we're running on a hedonic treadmill. We keep running and running, but we never actually get anywhere.
That's a great analogy. And Schopenhauer's solution, as we touched on earlier, is to step off the treadmill altogether. He suggests that true happiness lies not in fulfilling our desires, but in transcending them, in denying the will.
Okay, time for some real talk. Denying the will sounds awfully abstract, not to mention difficult. What does that actually look like in practice? Do we all need to become monks and meditate in caves?
Well, Schopenhauer didn't advocate for a one-size-fits-all approach. He acknowledged that there are different paths to this kind of liberation, and different people will be drawn to different methods.
But he did have a lot to say about asceticism, the idea of renouncing worldly pleasures, and living a life of simplicity and self-denial.
He did. He saw asceticism as a valid path, particularly for those who are naturally inclined towards it. He admired those individuals who could detach themselves from material possessions and sensual gratification.
I can see the appeal. But I'm not sure I'm ready to give up my morning coffee just yet. What about those of us who aren't quite ready for a life of complete renunciation? Are we doomed to suffer eternally at the whim of this insatiable will?
Not necessarily. Schopenhauer offered other pathways to transcendence, even within the context of everyday life. He highlighted the importance of ethical conduct, compassion, and, as we discussed earlier, art.
So even if we can't completely extinguish the will, we can at least learn to manage it, to channel its energy in more constructive ways.
Exactly. And for Schopenhauer, ethical conduct isn't about following a set of rigid rules or adhering to a specific moral code. It stems from a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings.
He believed we're all manifestations of the same fundamental will.
Right. So instead of seeing ourselves as separate, isolated individuals, we start to recognize our shared essence, our shared struggles. Precisely. And this recognition naturally leads to compassion. We begin to understand the suffering of others, not as something foreign or distant, but as a reflection of our own experience.
That's a powerful idea.
Uh-huh.
It shifts our perspective from me versus them to we're all in this together.
Exactly. And this expanded sense of self, this empathy, can motivate us to act ethically, to treat others with kindness and understanding, even when it's difficult.
It's like that saying, hurt people hurt people. If we can heal our own wounds, cultivate compassion for ourselves and others, maybe we can break the cycle of suffering.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And Schopenhauer believed that compassion could act as a powerful counterforce to the egoistic impulses of the will. By extending our concern beyond our own narrow self-interest, we can lessen the suffering that arises from a purely self-centered existence.
So even if we can't completely eradicate suffering from the world, we can at least work to minimize it, both for ourselves and for others.
Right. It's not about achieving some kind of perfect moral purity, but rather about striving to live in a way that aligns with our understanding of our shared humanity.
And art, as we touched on earlier, also plays a crucial role in this process. Schopenhauer believed that art, particularly music, allows us to temporarily escape the clutches of the will, to experience a moment of pure, disinterested contemplation.
He described art as offering a glimpse into the realm of ideas, those eternal forms that underlie the fleeting phenomena of the world.
I remember that passage, where he compares art to a sunbeam, piercing through a storm. It's such a vivid image. He's saying that while the world of will is like this raging tempest, art offers a moment of calm, a glimpse into a realm beyond the constant striving and suffering.
That's a great example. And it speaks to Schopenhauer's belief that art provides a kind of knowledge, a way of seeing the world, that transcends our individual will and desires.
But let's be real. Most of us aren't spending our days lost in rapturous contemplation of art. We're caught up in the daily grind, dealing with jobs, relationships, bills, all the messy stuff of human existence. How do we reconcile this everyday reality with Schopenhauer's philosophy?
Well, Schopenhauer recognized that we're all embodied beings, subject to the limitations and demands of the physical world. He wasn't suggesting that we need to live in a constant state of artistic ecstasy or monastic seclusion.
So how do we integrate his ideas into our everyday lives? How do we cultivate this awareness of the will, this ability to transcend its demands, amidst the chaos of the mundane?
Schopenhauer believed that even within the constraints of everyday life, we can still cultivate a kind of mindfulness and awareness of the will's influence on our thoughts, feelings, and actions. It's a gradual process, a journey of self-discovery, rather than a destination.
So it's about finding those moments of stillness amidst the chaos, recognizing when we're being driven by blind desire, and choosing a different path.
Precisely. And this is where Schopenhauer's philosophy can be surprisingly practical. By understanding the nature of the will, we can start to see the patterns of our own behavior, the ways in which we get caught up in the pursuit of fleeting pleasures, or react habitually to external stimuli.
It's like shining a light on the inner workings of our own minds, becoming more conscious of the forces that are driving our actions.
Exactly. And this increased awareness allows us to make more conscious choices, to act with greater intentionality, rather than being swept along by the currents of the will.
So instead of being slaves to our desires, we can become more like the captain of the ship, navigating the choppy waters of existence with greater skill and awareness.
That's a wonderful analogy. And this mastery of the will, for Schopenhauer, wasn't about repression or suppression. It was about understanding, acceptance, and ultimately transcendence.
Okay, but what does transcendence actually look like? Does it mean achieving some kind of blissful state of enlightenment where we're completely free from suffering?
Schopenhauer's view of transcendence is complex and nuanced. He acknowledged that we could never fully escape the limitations of our embodiment, the fact that we are both will and idea. But he believed that through a deep understanding of the nature of existence, through ethical conduct, compassion, and the pursuit of knowledge and beauty, we could achieve a greater sense of peace, a deeper connection to the universal, and a more fulfilling life.
It's a bit like that idea of becoming one with the universe.
Yes. In a way, yes. Schopenhauer saw the ultimate goal of human existence as a kind of homecoming, a return to a state of unity with the fundamental will that underlies all things.
And this unity,
Yeah.
this transcendence, is what he saw as true salvation.
Yes, it's a salvation not in some otherworldly sense, but rather a liberation from the suffering and striving that comes with being an individual, ego-driven will.
So it's not about escaping the world, but rather about finding a new way to be in the world, a way that's more aligned with our true nature.
Exactly. Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a unique and challenging perspective on the human condition, one that doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of existence, but ultimately offers a path towards a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
I think one of the most striking aspects of Schopenhauer's philosophy is his unflinching honesty. He doesn't try to sugarcoat the realities of life, the pain, the struggle, the impermanence of it all. But by confronting these difficult truths, he also opens up a space for a deeper, more authentic understanding of what it means to be human.
That's what makes his work so enduring, so relevant even today. It challenges us to question our assumptions, to confront our own desires and motivations, and to seek a deeper meaning beyond the fleeting satisfactions of the world.
I'm reminded of that powerful passage where Schopenhauer writes, "It is the courage to make a clean breast of it in face of every question that makes the philosopher. He must be like Sophocles' Oedipus, who, seeking enlightenment concerning his terrible fate, pursues his indefatigable inquiry, even though he divines that appalling horror awaits him in the answer. But most of us carry with us the Jocasta in our hearts, who begs Oedipus, for God's sake, to ask no more."
Such powerful words. It speaks to Schopenhauer's belief that true knowledge requires a willingness to face uncomfortable truths, to embrace the full complexity of existence, even when it challenges our deepest fears and desires.
I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've explored Schopenhauer's views on suffering and salvation, his ideas about ethical conduct and the role of compassion, and how he saw art as a pathway to transcending the will.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still much more to explore. Join us for the final part of this deep dive, where we'll delve into some of the more controversial aspects of Schopenhauer's thought, his ideas about death, free will, and the ultimate meaning of life.
We'll also discuss how Schopenhauer's philosophy has influenced other thinkers and artists, and how his ideas continue to resonate with us today.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Idea. We've covered so much ground, from his view of reality as a representation of this fundamental force he calls will, to his ideas about suffering and compassion, and the power of art to offer glimpses of transcendence.
Yeah, we've seen how Schopenhauer challenges us to confront the often uncomfortable truths about the human condition, urging us to seek a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
And now, in this last part, we're going to tackle some of the most profound and perhaps most challenging aspects of his philosophy: death, free will, and the ultimate question of meaning in a world driven by a blind and insatiable will.
Right. These are big questions, and Schopenhauer doesn't offer any easy answers, but his insights can be surprisingly illuminating, even if they don't always provide the comfort we might be seeking.
I think that's a good point. Let's start with death. Given Schopenhauer's emphasis on suffering as an inherent part of existence, you might expect him to view death as a welcome escape, a final release from the will's relentless grip.
Yeah, that's a natural assumption. But Schopenhauer's view of death is more nuanced than simply seeing it as an end to suffering. Remember, he saw the will as the fundamental reality, the driving force behind everything. And the will, he argued, is ultimately beyond the reach of death.
So even though our individual bodies cease to exist, the will itself persists. It's like that old saying, energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed.
Exactly. Schopenhauer believed that the will, as this universal force, is constantly manifesting itself in new forms, in a never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
It sounds a bit like the concept of reincarnation, but without all the karmic baggage often associated with it. It's more about this fundamental energy, finding new expressions, new outlets for its relentless striving.
That's a great way to put it. And this idea of the will's persistence beyond individual death ties into another big question: free will. If this will is the driving force behind everything, do we really have any control over our choices and actions?
That's the question that always trips me up when I'm trying to wrap my head around Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
I mean, on a daily basis, it certainly feels like I'm making choices, like I'm in control of my own destiny.
Of course. And Schopenhauer didn't deny the reality of that subjective experience of free will. He acknowledged that on the level of everyday life, we certainly feel as though we have options, as though we're making decisions freely.
But he argued that on a deeper level, our actions are ultimately determined by the will, by those deep-seated desires and motivations that we're often not even aware of.
Exactly. He believed that our sense of agency, our feeling of being in control, is largely an illusion, a product of our limited perspective. As individuals caught in this web of will and idea.
So, it's like we're driving a car, thinking we're in control, but there's actually someone else in the backseat, steering the wheel. We're just along for the ride, unaware of the true destination.
That's a vivid analogy. And it highlights how Schopenhauer's philosophy challenges us to question our assumptions about ourselves and the world around us.
It's definitely a humbling perspective, but if we're all just puppets of this blind will, doesn't that lead to a kind of nihilism? A sense that nothing really matters? since we have no real control over our actions?
Schopenhauer anticipated this objection,
Hmm.
and while he acknowledged the potential for his philosophy to lead to despair, he argued that it could also be a source of liberation.
Liberation. How so?
He believed that by recognizing the limitations of our individual will, we could actually achieve a greater sense of peace and freedom. We could stop clinging so tightly to our desires, our ego-driven strivings, and start to see ourselves as part of something larger, something interconnected.
It's like realizing that we're all waves in the same ocean, each with our own unique form and movement, but ultimately part of a larger, unified whole.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this shifting perspective, this letting go of our ego-driven desires, is what Schopenhauer saw as the path to true happiness, or what he called salvation.
Okay. But if we're letting go of our individual will, our desires and ambitions, what's left? What motivates us to act, to create, to engage with the world?
That's a great question, and leads us to perhaps the biggest question of all. What is the meaning of life in a world driven by a blind and insatiable will?
Right. I'm ready to hear Schopenhauer's take on this age-old philosophical conundrum. Does he offer us any hope, any sense of purpose? Or are we just cosmically insignificant specks of dust hurtling towards oblivion?
Schopenhauer doesn't shy away from this question. In fact, he dedicates a significant portion of his work to exploring the meaning, or perhaps the lack thereof, of human
The
existence.
verdict. Does life have meaning?
Schopenhauer's answer is, as always, nuanced and open to interpretation. He didn't believe that there's some preordained purpose or grand plan waiting to be discovered. He saw meaning, not as something inherent in the world, but rather as something we create through our actions and choices.
So, it's not about finding some external, objective meaning, but rather about cultivating an internal, subjective sense of purpose.
Exactly. Schopenhauer believed that the pursuit of knowledge, the creation of art, and the practice of compassion were all ways to imbue our lives with meaning, even in the face of suffering and impermanence.
It's almost like he's saying that the meaning of life is to live it fully, to engage with the world, to connect with others, to create, to experience, to love, to suffer, to learn, to grow.
It's a beautiful way to put it, and it captures the essence of Schopenhauer's philosophy, which, despite its reputation for pessimism, ultimately offers a path towards a more authentic and meaningful existence.
It's been an incredible journey, exploring Schopenhauer's The World as Will and idea. We've wrestled with his challenging ideas, confronted uncomfortable truths, and hopefully emerged with a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Yes. Remember, Schopenhauer encourages us to embrace the full complexity of existence, to cultivate compassion and awareness, and to find those moments of transcendence that remind us of the beauty and wonder, even amidst the suffering, of this strange and wonderful world we call home.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll continue exploring these ideas, questioning your assumptions, and seeking your own path towards meaning and fulfillment.
Until next time.